Summary of Sachar Committee Report. In 2005, the Prime Minister issued a notification for constitution of a high-level committee to prepare a report on the social, economic and educational status of the Muslim community of India. The 7-member high-level committee was chaired by Justice Rajendra Sachar, and it submitted its final report in November 2006. The government tabled the Justice Rajendra Sachar Committee report in Parliament in 2007. The Sachar Committee compiled data from a number of sources. The report frames these issues as related to identity, security and equity. Barring some generic observations about the causes for the development deficit among Muslims, there is no explicit or detailed discussion of the causes of such conditions. Follow-up action on Sachar Committee recommendations were discussed in Parliament in March 2013. Now let us briefly see what were the main recommendations of the Sachar Committee report. The committee made a number of recommendations to address the status of the Muslim community in India. 1. Set up an Equal Opportunity Commission to look into the grievances of the deprived groups like minorities. 2. Create a nomination procedures to increase participation of minorities in public bodies. Establish a delimitation procedure that does not reserve constituencies with high minority populations for scheduled castes. Increase employment share of Muslims, particularly where there is a great deal of public dealing. Work mechanisms to link madrasas with higher secondary school board. Recognize degrees from madrasas for eligibility in defense, civil and banking examinations. The committee also suggested that policies should sharply focus on inclusive development and mainstreaming of the community while respecting its diversity. Now let us see what were the terms of reference of Sachar Committee. The committee's mandate was to A. Obtain relevant information and conduct a literature survey on the relative social, economic and educational status of Muslims in India at the state, regional and district levels. It was also to determine the level of their socio-economic development. Further, determine the relative share in the public and private sector employment. Determine the proportion of OBCs from the Muslim community in the total OBC population in various states. Determine access to education and health services, municipal infrastructure and bank credit provided by the government or the public sector entities. There were a number of key findings and they are discussed below. Population. According to 2001 census, India's Muslim population was about 138 million. That is about 13.4% of the total population. And by 2006, the Muslim population would be over 150 million. The report stated that in India, populations of all major religions have experienced a large growth in the recent past, but the growth among the Muslims has been higher than the average. Between 1961 and 2001, the percent of Muslim population increased from 10.7% to 13.4%. Muslims had higher share in the younger age groups. The committee estimated the proportion of Muslims to rise from 18% to 21% by 2101 under different scenarios. There has been a decline in the growth rate among all groups between 1991 and 2001, including the Muslims. In the most states, the states with the highest percentage of Muslims were, of course, Jammu and Kashmir, that is 67%, Assam 31%, West Bengal 25% and Kerala 25%. Though the sex ratio among Muslims at 936 girls per 1000 boys is only marginally better than the national average of 933, the figure for 0 to 6 age group is better at 950 as compared to 927 for all religions. Education conditions among Muslims. The literacy rate among Muslims in 2001 was 59.1%, which was below the national average of 65%. The gap was greatest in the urban areas. In many states, the Muslim literacy levels were higher than those of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. However, the highest increase in school enrollments over the past 5 years have occurred among scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, followed by Muslims. The Sachar committee report also noted that despite the common belief that a large number of Muslim children attended madrasas for primary education, only 3% of Muslim children among the school-going age went to madrasas. Instead, many Muslim children were enrolled in maktabs, which provide a supplementary religious education in addition to the enrollment in public schools. As regards higher education, according to the 2001 census, 7% of the population aged 20 years and above were graduates or held diplomas, whereas only 4% among Muslims were graduates or held diplomas. The gap between Muslims and other socio-religious categories increased as the level of education increased, and that unemployment rates among Muslim graduates was the highest among the poor and the non-poor. Economy and employment and government employment programs. Worker population ratios for Muslims were significantly lower than for all other socio-religious categories in rural areas, but marginally lower in urban areas. The lower ratios are mainly due to much lower participation in the economic activity by Muslim women. According to the committee report, the most striking feature is the relatively high share of Muslim workers engaged in self-employment activity, primarily in the urban areas and for women workers. Participation of Muslims salaried workers in both the public and private sectors was quite low, which was true also for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and the average salary of Muslim workers is lower than the others, possibly as more Muslims are in the inferior jobs. Participation of Muslim workers in the informal sectors is much higher than the average population, and the percentage of Muslim women working within their homes, which is 70%, was much higher than all the workers, which was 51%. Muslims' participation rates in the traditional manufacturing and trade, especially apparels, auto repair and electrical machinery, is much higher than for other groups. Their participation in the agriculture sector was, however, lower. Also, Muslim participation rates in the security-related activity such as police was 4% as compared to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, which was at 12%, and OBCs at 23% each. According to the report, the overall participation of Muslims in the central government departments and agencies was very low at all levels. There is no one state in which the representation of Muslims in the government departments matched their population share. Employment of Muslims was also very low in the universities, banks, and the central public sector units. Now, the access to the bank credits. The committee reported that the access to Muslims to bank credit was low and inadequate. The average size of credit is low as compared with the other socio-religious categories. In 2001 census, the percentage of households availing bank facilities was much lower in villages with high Muslims populations. Some banks identified number of Muslim areas as negative geographical zones where bank credit and other facilities were not easily provided. The average amount lent per account to Muslims was about half of other minorities and one-third of others categories. The committee report further stated that the financial exclusion of Muslims has far-reaching implications for their socio-economic and educational upliftment. Steps should be introduced to specifically direct credit to Muslims, create awareness of various credit schemes, and bring a transparency in reporting of the information. Now, access to social and physical infrastructure. There is clear and significant inverse association between the proportion of the Muslim population and the availability of the educational infrastructure in small villages. Studies found that non-Muslim areas had better roads, local bus stops, pakka houses, sewage and drainage and water supply facilities as compared to the areas inhabited by the Muslims. The committee highlighted further following points. About one-third of the small villages with high concentration of Muslims did not have any educational institutions. About 40% of large villages with substantial Muslim concentration did not have any medical facilities. Poverty, consumption and standards of living. Muslims faced fairly high levels of poverty. Their conditions on the whole are only slightly better than those of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, though slightly worse in urban areas. According to National Sample Survey data, overall 22.7% of India's population was poor in 2004 and 5, with scheduled castes and scheduled tribes contributing 35%, followed by the Muslims at 31%. Relative deprivation of the Muslim community in terms of consumption expenditure was much higher in urban areas than in rural areas. A substantially large proportion of the Muslim households in the urban areas were in the less than 500 rupees expenditure bracket. Poverty among Muslims has declined though in rural areas by 12%, whereas the economic conditions of Muslims in urban areas were found to have not improved as much as other socio-religious categories. Muslim OBC and affirmative action. The report compared the status of Muslims who were not listed as OBCs and thus did not qualify for the reservations with the Muslim OBCs. At least 82 different social groups among Muslims were declared OBCs by the Mandal Commission. According to the last round of National Sample Survey, 40.7% of Muslims were Muslim OBCs, which is only 15.7% of the total OBC population of the country. According to the report, lower representation of Muslim OBCs suggested that the benefits of entitlement meant for the backward classes are yet to reach them. The conditions of the general Muslim category were lower than the Hindu OBCs who have the benefit of reservation. However, the conditions of Muslim OBCs were worse than those of the general Muslim category. The three groups of Muslims in India, that is, Ashrafs, Ilafs and Arjals, in order of caste hierarchy required different types of affirmative action according to the report. Sachar committee made a series of recommendations. They are as follows. Set up an equal opportunity commission to look into the grievances of the deprived groups like minorities. Create a nomination procedure to increase the participation of minorities in public bodies. Provide legal mechanism to address complaints of discrimination against minorities in the matters of employment, housing, schooling, and obtaining bank loans. Establish a delimitation procedure that does not reserve constituencies with high minority populations for scheduled castes. Initiate and institutionalize a process of evaluating contents of textbooks to purge them of explicit and implicit material that may impart inappropriate social values, especially religious intolerance. Create a national data bank where all relevant data for various socio-religious categories are maintained. Set up an autonomous assessment and monitoring authority to evaluate the extent of the development benefits. Encourage the University Grants Commission to evolve a system where part of the allocation to colleges and universities is linked to diversity in student population. Facilitate admissions to the most backward amongst all socio-religious groups in regular universities and autonomous colleges and evolving alternative admission criteria. Provide different types of affirmative action to the three main Muslim groups, that is, Ashrafs, Ilafs, and Arzals. Designate Arjans Muslim group as most backward classes as they need multifarious measures including reservations. Provide Hindu OBC type of attention to Ilaf Muslim group. Provide financial and other support to initiatives built around occupations where Muslims are concentrated and that have a growth potential. Increase employment share of Muslims, particularly where there is a great deal of public dealing. Working out mechanisms to link madrasas with higher secondary school board. Recognize degrees from madrasas for eligibility in defense, civil, and banking examinations. Provide hostel facilities at a reasonable cost for students from minorities on a priority basis. Promote and enhance access to Muslims in priority sector advances. Include in teacher training components that introduce importance of diversity and plurality and sensitizing teachers towards needs and aspirations of Muslims and other marginalized communities. Open high quality Urdu medium schools wherever they are in demand and ensure high quality textbooks for students in the Urdu language. Draw Muslims on relevant interview panels and boards. Improve participation and share of minorities, particularly Muslims, in the business of regular commercial banks. Set up a national Waqf development corporation with a revolving corpus fund of 500 crore rupees. Create a new cadre to deal with the specific Waqf affairs.